Hey, everybody. I recently went through this experience where I thought that I was talking about the things that I needed to talk about, saying the things that I needed to say. I thought that I was being authentic and honest and transparent. And I was, and I wasn't. And it was a big, huge lesson for me and something that I want to share with you. And I hope that you guys can learn from. Super excited to dig into this topic with you about how to really be human, how to really be authentic, how to really be transparent, and tell you about my mistake in convincing myself I was when I wasn't. This is the More Than Corporate podcast, and I'm your host, Amber Fuhriman. Welcome to the More Than Corporate podcast. I'm Amber Fuhriman, recovering perfectionist and serial accomplisher. If you're anything like I used to be, you've been living your life thinking that if you accomplish enough stuff, you'll finally find the success you've always wanted. But what if it's not about accomplishing more stuff? What if it's about accomplishing the right stuff? I believe you don't find success, you create it by intentionally designing the life you want and having the courage to get out of your comfort zone to live your design. I went from doing what I was supposed to do to doing what I love to do, and now I get to help others do the same. Keep listening as I chat with inspiring people who make it their mission to live their best life every day and learn how you too can live the life you've always wanted. All right, guys, so let's dig into this topic. You guys hear me talk all the time about being authentic and being transparent and being honest. And I truly believe in those topics. I believe that that is the only way for us to really connect, to have what we want to have, to be able to live the life that we want to live. I also believe in getting out of your comfort zone. And one of the things that I had recently done without even realizing it is I had become so comfortable talking about authenticity and vulnerability and transparency that I forgot to actually be those things while I talked about it. It's really interesting to think about. And I made the comment to a coach of mine. So back up for just a little bit. Let me explain really quickly. If you missed a video where I've explained this, we have 4 processing systems or processing styles that are in every single one of us in different degrees. Auditory, digital, those are the thinkers. Your kinesthetic, those are our feelers. The auditory, those are our hearers. And then we have the visual, and those are the seers. And these are the way that you process information. And I am a very high auditory digital and a very high kinesthetic and a very high auditory. And the auditory digital people, that's the thoughts that go on in your head. And these people are very analytical, very, very logical. If you've ever talked to somebody that like you're trying to explain something to them and they're breaking it down in steps and you're like, good Lord. My friend Corinne and I laugh about this all the time. I told her that we were going to get shirts made that had said thinker and feeler, like instead of Pinky and the Brain, it was going to be thinker and feeler. Because when we're together, we're such opposites, but we're also so alike. It's really odd. Anyways, I digress. So very high auditory digital. And I mentioned to my coach, I said, leave it to an auditory digital to turn authenticity, vulnerability, and transparency into intellectual concepts. And let me explain what I mean by that. I became so comfortable talking about these things that I talked about them without the emotion. And how do you honestly have these conversations without really being authentic and transparent? What it really came down for me, and I'm going to tell you where this really hit me upside the head here in just a minute. Um, what it really came down to for me was just being human, being me, being seen, and allowing myself to be truly me in every scenario. So you guys know that I'm a part of this event called PodMax. And I was at this PodMax event this last time in January. And this message that I kept getting through everybody that I interviewed and the keynote speaker was just be human. And I was doing an interview with a friend of mine. She actually owns the obstacle course gym that I started training on when I started training for Tough Mudder and then eventually World's Toughest Mudder. Her name's Julie. And she was telling me this story, and I'm not going to get into the story. You'll listen to the podcast for that, and it's very personal to her. But she was telling me about this situation where she wanted to go into expert mode. Somebody was telling her about a problem and she wanted to go into expert mode instead of just stepping back and being human and saying, okay, what's going on? And it made me realize that so many times, especially in any field, but in the coaching field for sure, when somebody is coming to us with a problem, so many times we go straight into fix it mode. We go straight into solve it mode. We go straight into problem solving mode. And sometimes we miss the human. We miss the what's really going on inside that's leading to this behavior. And we were talking about being able to talk about your before and after. And she has a huge weight loss story. That's why she started her gym. I have a transformation story that I talk about often. And what I realized while she was telling her story was that I'm really good about talking about what my life was like in 2016 when I had my breakdown, the anxiety attacks, the panic attacks. Really good at talking about those. Really good at talking about the process of NLP and learning about it and the intellectual side of it. And really good about talking about the now. And so for me, it was like, okay, here's my before and after. Let me help. And what I realized in that moment is that all the stuff I was cutting out, the middle, is where the connection's at. That's where being able to really relate to somebody comes from. And so how many times do you do this with your client where they come into your office or you're talking to them on the phone and they're telling you about a problem and you go straight into solve it mode? Or they're talking to you about somewhere that they're at and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been there too. And now I'm here. Let me help you get here. What I cut out of my story was the imposter syndrome, the waking up every day wondering if I could do it, the hours of time that I spent crying with my coach about how big of a failure I felt like as I was trying to move forward, the questioning my direction, the anxiety that goes into trying to figure out what you want to do and whether you're strong enough to get there. All these human emotions I cut out of my story when I talk to people. And when I'm talking one-on-one to individuals, they come out naturally. And I realized that I will not be able to make the impact that I want to make on the world without the middle. So I bring this up in this podcast because I want you to think about areas in your life where you're cutting out the middle. Where are you with your clients going straight to the end result and cutting out the process? Are you wondering why people aren't connecting with you in your business? And if so, are you actually giving them something to connect to? It's a really interesting question. It's a really, really interesting process because if you're anything like me, you become so comfortable talking about it that it just becomes almost robotic. And this was the huge wake-up call that I needed, that there are other ways to get this message across. And this is a really, really uncomfortable video for me to do and a really uncomfortable podcast for me to do because it is, nobody wants to stand up and be like, hey, I thought I was doing the thing, but I wasn't really doing the thing. So this is what I need to do to change. And that's what life is, right? That's what personal development is. That's what growth is being able to say, I thought I was doing it, I thought I had it, and maybe I did. And then, I always describe comfort zones as this elastic band where it stretches and it stretches and it stretches, but it never really breaks. And the more you stretch it, the bigger it gets, and the more you have to do to continue to stretch it. So what pushed me out of my comfort zone in 2016 no longer pushes me out of my comfort zone. And the more that you continuously try to improve your life, the more that you continuously work on personal development, the more that you make intentional actions to be able to have the life that you want to have, the more you have to do to continue to grow. And that's where I fell with this authenticity and vulnerability. I thought, okay, I'm talking about these things. This is what I've been talking about for the last year, and this makes perfect sense. But it no longer made me uncomfortable. So it was time to grow, and it was time to dig deep, and it was time to figure out what I was cutting out in the human. What were the important things that I wasn't talking about? And I would really encourage you to think of where you're at. And if you have a very similar experience where you felt like you were out of your comfort zone, you thought you were out of your comfort zone, you thought that you were connecting with people, you thought you were doing the thing, whatever that is. And then it turns out that you were, like me, turning the thing into an intellectual concept without stories and feeling behind it. So expert mode is so easy to fall into. It's so easy as people who provide solutions, products and solutions and services. As people who provide those to other individuals, it's so easy to say, oh my gosh, I can see so clearly what you need. I can see so clearly how I can help you. And that's great that you can see it. The only way that you're able to help someone, though, is if they can see it. And the only way that they are going to be able to see how you are the answer to their problem is if you really connect with the problem that they're having. My friend Corinne, I talked about her just a minute ago. We had this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and we asked, how do you help somebody with the problem that they have when the problem that they have isn't the problem that they think they have? And I know that sounds like a tongue twister, so let me explain. We have a phrase in NLP that says the problem's never the problem. The problem is never the presenting problem. Let's think about objections when you're trying to get your products and services to somebody. I don't have the money. It's never a money problem, ever. What's the real problem? What's the real issue that's going on underneath? I don't have the time. It's never a time problem, ever. What's the real thing that's getting in the way? Do they not trust themselves? Do they not believe in themselves? Do they not believe in you? Do they not believe that, have they been burned in the past by someone? And that causes them to be overly questionable about anybody in the field that you're in. It's never about the money, and it's never about the time. It's always about something else. And so the key to really being able to connect with people, to be able to get your products and services to them, is to not only understand the problem that they have, also to understand the problem that they think they have, so that you can speak to the presenting problem and solve the actual problem. And the only way to do that is to be truly human and truly connect and truly vulnerable about the fact that you have been exactly where they are before, that you know exactly what they're feeling, and you know exactly what it takes to get to where they want to go. So the real moral of this story for this podcast and this video is, take a look at your life and figure out where you have omitted the human. Where have you become overly analytical? Where have you become more logical? And how can you start to connect the pieces again so that you can have that true connection with your client base? I hope that this has been helpful. Always remember, guys, that you have the ability to define your best life, and you owe it to yourself to design a blueprint that you have the courage to implement. Success doesn't happen by accident. We create it by being intentional about everything that we do, and you owe it to yourself to give yourself that opportunity. Have a fantastic day, guys. We will talk again soon. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the show. I hope that something that was said resonated with you or provided value to you in one way or another. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on the show. You can reach out to me on Facebook or Instagram at Amber Fuhriman. Also, I've created a Facebook community for followers of the show to interact with me and other members of the community. You can find that on Facebook at More Than Corporate. So go ahead and join that group if you'd like to stay up to date on podcast happenings and meet some really cool people. Again, thanks so much for tuning in.